Why was she holding a mop when she could have held a rifle? That's the question no one thought to ask. Not the master chief who watched her clean his boots. Not the Navy SEALs who kicked over water bottles for her to mop up. Not the officers who walked past her like she was furniture. She was invisible, a ghost in gray coveralls. And that's exactly what she needed to be. Because some truths are too dangerous to remember, and some skills never forget. The Nevada desert doesn't care about your rank. It burns everyone the same. At Camp Artemis, where America's deadliest warriors train in classified silence, the sun beat down at 95 degrees, turning the concrete into a griddle and the air into something you had to chew before breathing. This wasn't a place you stumbled into. Security clearances stacked on security clearances. Need-to-know protocols that kept secrets buried under more secrets. And somewhere in that fortress of shadows and sand, a woman pushed a mop across polished floors. Her name was Nix Varley. At least that's what her ID badge said. She kept her eyes down, always down. Her movements were precise, almost mechanical. The way she divided each hallway into quadrants, the consistency of her strokes, the absence of wasted motion. There was something almost military about it, but no one noticed. To the operators who rushed past, she was background noise, a necessary part of the machine that kept the facility running, invisible. But invisibility can be a choice or a curse. For Nix, it was both. As she worked, images flickered through her mind like a broken projector, hands steadying a rifle, a medal being placed in a wooden box, hushed conversations in rooms that felt important with people whose faces remained blurred at the edges. These fragments came and went so quickly she'd learned to ignore them. Static, meaningless, just her brain misfiring in the heat. Her watch beeped, time to clean the outdoor ranges. She gathered her supplies and stepped into the furnace, squinting against light that could blind you if you stared too long. The temperature climbed. Her uniform stuck to her back, but Nix barely registered discomfort as she made her way toward the farthest range. The one they called Ghost Range, where legends were made or broken. Master Chief Riker Calloway stood like a monument. 55 years old, with a face mapped by decades squinting through scopes in places the government pretended didn't exist. His back was straight as a flagpole. His voice carried across the range without him raising it even slightly. This was a man who didn't need volume to command attention. "Gentlemen," he said, watching a line of Navy SEALs prepare their weapons. "This course separates the elite from the merely adequate. 5 targets, variable distances, unpredictable wind conditions. Miss once, you start over. This isn't about being good enough. This is about perfection." Nix kept to the edges. She collected discarded water bottles, wiped down equipment stands, worked silently. But her eyes drifted toward the firing positions. Just for seconds. Just long enough to see the stance, the breathing, the minute adjustments that separated amateurs from professionals. Lieutenant Thorne Westerland stepped up to the line. 6'2", shoulders broad enough to carry all the confidence in the world, square jaw that looked sculpted for recruitment posters. He settled into position with the ease of someone who'd never doubted his own exceptional abilities. Minor adjustment to his scope, deep breath, then 5 shots that cracked across the desert like thunder announcing its arrival. 5 hits, all within the center ring, not perfect, but impressive enough that several SEALs nodded appreciation. The digital scoreboard flickered, new record, best score of the day. Westerland stood and turned with a smile that knew exactly how good it looked. "That's how it's done, gentlemen." His eyes caught Nix mopping nearby. "Hey, Janitor, make sure you get this side extra clean. History was just made." Several operators chuckled. Not cruel laughter, just casual. The kind that comes easy when you're at the top and someone else is at the bottom. Nix said nothing, didn't look up, just kept moving her mop in those same precise patterns. But for just a moment, for less than a heartbeat, her eyes lingered on Westerland's rifle. Not with envy, not with admiration, with something closer to professional assessment, like a pianist hearing a wrong note no one else caught. The moment passed so quickly that only Calloway noticed, and even he dismissed it. What would a janitor know about marksmanship? The day dragged on. More SEALs attempted the course. Few matched Westerland's score. Calloway's frustration grew visible in the tightening of his jaw, the increasingly sharp edge to his commentary. "You call yourselves elite," he barked after a particularly disappointing round. "My grandmother could shoot better than this, and she's been dead for 15 years. The sun climbed higher. Heat distorted the air above the targets, making them shimmer like mirages. Nix moved her cleaning operation closer to the firing line, carefully staying out of the way, but within earshot of every instruction Calloway gave. When she bent to clean a spill near the shooting position, Westerland returned from the water station and intentionally kicked over his bottle. Water splashed across the area she'd just finished. "Oops," he said, not bothering to look at her. "Looks like you missed a spot." More snickering from the younger SEALs, but Calloway shot them a look that straightened their faces immediately. Nix simply retrieved her mop and began cleaning again. No reaction, no protest, nothing. But as she worked, something shifted. Her stance changed. Her body unconsciously mirrored the shooting position Calloway had demonstrated earlier. Weight balanced, shoulders squared, an invisible rifle against her shoulder. Calloway noticed, his eyes narrowed. He studied the janitor more carefully than he had before. Then he looked away, dismissing what he'd seen. Coincidence, nothing more. When the range emptied for lunch, Nix remained behind, alone with the desert wind and distant targets. Her hands came up slowly, forming the shape of a rifle against her shoulder. She made tiny adjustments for imaginary windage. Her index finger extended slightly, caressing an invisible trigger. Her breathing slowed, steady, controlled. The breathing of someone who'd done this 10,000 times before. "Something interesting out there." Calloway's voice came from behind her. Nix's hands dropped immediately to her sides. She hadn't heard him return, hadn't heard anything. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her face remained calm. "The wind changed," she said quietly, keeping her eyes downrange. "Third target needs a half-minute adjustment." Calloway's weathered face registered surprise before settling back into neutrality. "And you'd know that how?" Nix said nothing, simply retrieved her cleaning cart and moved away, but the damage was done. The seed was planted. Calloway watched her go, his expression thoughtful, curious, like a man who'd just seen something that didn't fit the world he understood. When training resumed after lunch, one of the younger SEALs took his position at the firing line. Jenkins, good operator, solid fundamentals, but he'd struggled with the third target all morning, missing by margins that might have been acceptable elsewhere, not at Camp Artemis. "Jenkins," Calloway said, stepping closer. "Adjust half a minute for the crosswind on target 3. The SEAL made the correction, fired 5 perfect hits. He turned to Calloway with surprise and gratitude, but the Master Chief wasn't looking at him. His eyes were on the far end of the range, where Nix was emptying a trash can, her back to the proceedings, her shoulders tight with something that might have been tension, or might have been hope. The afternoon wore on. More operators took their turns. Performances varied from adequate to occasionally impressive. None matched Westerland's record. Through it all, Calloway found his attention repeatedly drawn to the quiet janitor who moved through the facility like a ghost. There was something in her movements, in the economy of her actions, something that nagged at his professional instincts like a splinter he couldn't see but could definitely feel. As shadows lengthened across the range, a group of high-ranking officers arrived to observe the final qualification round. Among them was Admiral Hawthorne, silver hair, stern face, the kind of presence that commanded attention without effort. The operators straightened perceptibly at his arrival. Westerland stepped up for another demonstration, confident, ready to prove his earlier performance wasn't a fluke. He settled into position, made his adjustments, and fired. Another strong showing. Not quite his morning record, but close enough to draw approving nods from the watching officers. "Outstanding work, Lieutenant," Admiral Hawthorne said. "That's the kind of precision we need in the field." Westerland practically glowed. "Thank you, sir. Just doing what I've been trained to do." Across the range, Nix had stopped working. She stood motionless, watching. And for the first time since arriving at Camp Artemis 3 years ago, something stirred inside her. Not a memory, not quite. More like muscle memory trying to surface. A knowing without understanding. Her hands trembled slightly. She gripped her mop tighter to steady them. Calloway noticed. He always noticed. And in that moment, watching the janitor watch the seal, a wild thought crossed his mind. Impossible, absurd, but it wouldn't let go. He crossed the range in long strides. "Ma'am," he said, his tone respectful in a way that made Nix look up sharply. "Would you mind stepping over here for a moment?" Every head turned. Every operator watched as the janitor set down her mop and crossed to where Calloway stood. Confusion rippled through the assembled SEALs. Why was the Master Chief talking to the cleaning staff? "Do you know how to handle a rifle?" Calloway asked. The question hung in the desert air. Nix stared at him. Her mouth opened, closed, something flickered across her face. Fear, recognition. "I don't know," she said finally. And the strange thing was, she meant it. She genuinely didn't know. "Would you like to find out?" Calloway's voice was gentle now, like he was talking to something wild that might bolt at any moment. Westerland laughed, not a mean laugh, just disbelief. "Chief, with all due respect, we're in the middle of qualifications. This isn't really the time for—" "Lieutenant," Admiral Hawthorne interrupted, his eyes sharp and focused on Nix. "I'd very much like to see what the Master Chief has in mind." Calloway extended his personal rifle toward Nix, a custom piece. Precision instrument worth more than most people made in a year. "Just hold it," he said. "See how it feels." Nix's hands reached out, and the moment her fingers touched the weapon, everything changed. What happened when she touched that rifle? The watching SEALs saw her whole body transform, posture shifting, breathing changing, like someone flipping a switch that had been off for years. But what they couldn't see was what was happening inside Nix's mind. A dam breaking. Fragments that had been meaningless static suddenly snapping into focus like a photograph developing in reverse. Not all of it, not even most of it, but enough. Enough to remember that once, a long time ago, she'd been someone else entirely. The rifle felt like coming home to a house you'd forgotten you owned. Weight perfectly balanced. Stock settling against her shoulder like it had been waiting for her specifically. Nix's fingers found the grip, the trigger, the magazine release without conscious thought. Muscle memory so deep it lived in her bones. Calloway watched her face. "You've held a rifle before." It wasn't a question. Nix nodded slowly. "I think so. I don't remember, but my hands do." Westerland crossed his arms, still skeptical, still certain this was some kind of bizarre joke. "Chief, no disrespect to the lady, but this is getting a little ridiculous. We have qualifications to complete." "Then let's complete them," Calloway said. His eyes never left Nix. "Ma'am, would you like to take a shot?" "I don't think," Nix started, but Admiral Hawthorne stepped forward. "I think you should," he said quietly. Something in his voice made the hairs on Nix's neck stand up, like he knew something she didn't, like he'd been waiting for this moment. The range fell silent. Every operator watched as Nix stepped up to the firing line. Her movements were different now, confident, purposeful. She settled into position, and it was like watching someone slip into a second skin they'd forgotten they were wearing. "5 targets," Calloway said softly. "Variable distances. Winds unpredictable today. Take your time." But Nix didn't need time. Her eye found the scope. Her breathing steadied into a rhythm that came from somewhere beyond conscious memory. First target. Range estimation automatic. Wind calculation instantaneous. Her finger caressed the trigger with the gentleness of someone cradling something precious. First shot. The crack echoed across the desert. Downrange, the target registered a perfect center hit. "Lucky shot," someone muttered. Probably Westerland, though Nix wasn't paying attention anymore. She was already acquiring the second target. Second shot, another perfect hit. Third shot, the one that had given everyone trouble all day, the one with the tricky crosswind. Nix made a microscopic adjustment, fired, dead center. Fourth shot, longest distance. Heat shimmer made it nearly impossible to get a clean sight picture. Nix compensated for mirage, for wind, for the curvature of the earth itself. Fired, perfect. Fifth shot. By now the silence on the range was absolute. Every operator had stopped breathing. Even the wind seemed to pause. Nix fired. The digital scoreboard flickered, then lit up with a score that made several people gasp audibly. Not just perfect hits, but grouping so tight that all 5 shots could have been covered by a silver dollar. The scoreboard registered it officially. New record, not just for the day, for the entire history of Ghost Range. Nix lowered the rifle carefully. Her hands were shaking now, not from nerves, from something deeper, like her body was remembering things her mind couldn't quite grasp yet. She turned and extended the rifle back to Calloway. "Thank you," she said quietly. Then she returned to her mop without another word. For 10 full seconds, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. They all just stared at the scoreboard like it might suddenly announce it was joking. Then Admiral Hawthorne started walking toward Nix. His footsteps were the only sound in the desert. When he reached her, he stopped. "Colonel Varley," he said, using a rank that made every operator's head snap around. "It's good to see you again." Nix's mop clattered to the ground. "Colonel," the word felt foreign in her mouth, but also familiar, like a name you haven't heard in years but recognize instantly. "You don't remember," Hawthorne said gently. "Dr. Reeves said you might not. 3 years ago, you were one of our most decorated snipers, designer of the training methodology we still use here. Then Operation Artemis went wrong. We lost you, declared you KIA after 18 months of searching. We never expected to find you mopping floors at your own training facility." The world tilted sideways. Nix felt her knees weaken. Calloway was there instantly, steadying her with a hand on her elbow. "Easy," he said. "Breathe." "I don't understand," Nix whispered. "I've been here 3 years, cleaning, just cleaning. I don't remember." "Traumatic amnesia," Hawthorne said. "Dr. Reeves can explain it better than I can. But the short version is that your mind buried everything. A defense mechanism. You wandered out of the desert one day with no memory of who you were, only your first name. We hired you as maintenance staff because you needed work, and because," he paused, "because some part of me hoped that keeping you close to this environment might help you remember someday." Westerland looked like he'd been punched in the stomach. "You're saying the janitor is actually a decorated military sniper?" "Was," Nix said softly. "I don't know what I am now." "You're someone who just broke every record on this range," Calloway said firmly. "That's what you are. Your hands remembered even if your mind didn't. That's not something that just disappears." But Nix shook her head. The images flooding back were fragmentary, incomplete, like trying to put together a puzzle when half the pieces were missing. She could remember sensations, the feeling of a rifle, the mathematics of wind and distance, the satisfaction of a perfect shot, but the context, the missions, the person she'd been before the desert swallowed her whole, that was still lost in fog. "I need to sit down," she said. They took her inside, away from the staring eyes and whispered conversations. Admiral Hawthorne and Calloway flanked her like guards, though whether they were protecting her from others or from herself wasn't entirely clear. In a small office with blinds drawn against the brutal sun, Hawthorne laid out 3 years of her life. The missions she couldn't remember, the lives she'd saved, the record she'd built as one of the finest precision shooters the military had ever produced. And then Operation Artemis, a mission so classified that even now he could only speak in generalities. Something had gone wrong, she'd gone missing. They'd searched, found nothing. eventually declared her dead, because that was easier than admitting they'd lost someone they couldn't afford to lose. And then one day, Hawthorne continued, you showed up at our hearing office. No memory. No ID except a driver's license with your first name. You needed work. We needed janitors. It seemed like fate's cruel joke. Why didn't you tell me? Nix's voice cracked. 3 years I've been here. 3 years you've known who I was. We didn't know at first, Hawthorne admitted. You'd lost weight, changed your hair, moved differently. By the time we confirmed your identity through dental records, Dr. Reeves strongly advised against confronting you with information you weren't ready to process. She said forcing memories could cause permanent psychological damage. So we waited, watched, hoped you'd remember naturally. And today, Nix looked at Calloway. What made you hand me that rifle? Calloway's weather-beaten face showed something that might have been a smile. The way you stood, the way you watched. I've been training snipers for 30 years. I know how they move even when they're trying not to. You've been trying not to for 3 years. Today, you forgot to hide. Silence settled over the office like dust. Outside, Nix could hear the range resuming activity. Life going on as if the world hadn't just turned inside out. She looked down at her hands, calloused from 3 years of pushing mops and carrying cleaning supplies. But underneath that, underneath were the hands of someone who'd held a rifle so often it had become part of her. What happens now? She asked. That's up to you, Hawthorne said. Medically, you're cleared for duty if you choose to return. Dr. Reeves has been monitoring your psychological state this whole time. She believes you're stable enough to handle the truth, even if you don't remember everything. But we can't force you back into a life you don't remember living. And if I don't want to return, the question felt like betrayal, but Nix had to ask it. If I just want to keep cleaning and forget this ever happened. Hawthorne's expression softened. Then you keep cleaning, no judgment, no pressure. You've given enough to this country, more than enough. If you want to live a quiet life, you've earned that right. Nix closed her eyes. Behind her lids, images flickered. A rifle scope. Sand dunes stretching to infinity. The weight of responsibility that came with being trusted to take shots that mattered. She didn't remember the specifics, but she remembered the feeling, the purpose. I need time, she said finally, to think, to process. She laughed, but it came out broken. This is a lot. Take all the time you need, Hawthorne stood. But Colonel Varley, that shot you made today, that wasn't luck. That wasn't muscle memory. That was who you are, whether you remember it or not. Did she want to remember? That's what haunted Nix through the sleepless night that followed. Lying in her small apartment off base, staring at ceiling tiles she'd counted 1,000 times before, she couldn't shake the feeling that remembering might destroy whatever peace she'd managed to build in her small, invisible life. Because peace, however fragile, was something. And the past was a weapon that had already wounded her once. Morning came anyway. The sun didn't care about identity crises. Nix dressed in her maintenance uniform out of habit, then stopped, stared at herself in the mirror. Who was looking back? The janitor who'd spent 3 years in comfortable anonymity, or the colonel who'd once been important enough to declare dead? Her phone buzzed, text from Hawthorne. Dr. Reeves available today if you'd like to talk. No pressure, no timeline. Nix stared at the message for a long time. Then she deleted it and drove to Camp Artemis like every other morning. Some routines were stronger than confusion. The moment she walked through the gates, she knew something had changed. Operators who'd passed her without a glance for 3 years now watched her with open curiosity. Whispers followed her down hallways. The invisible woman had become the most visible person on base overnight. She made her way to the supply closet, gathered her cleaning cart, but her hands hesitated on the mop handle. It felt wrong suddenly, like holding a prop in a play she hadn't auditioned for. You don't have to do that anymore. Calloway stood in the doorway, not the intimidating Master Chief from the range, just a man who looked tired. Admiral's orders. You're on administrative leave until you decide what you want to do. I don't know what I want to do, Nix admitted. Yesterday I knew exactly who I was. Today I don't even know what name to use. Use both. Calloway stepped into the small closet. You've been Nix Varley for 3 years, that's real. That person exists, but Colonel Varley exists too. Maybe you don't have to choose. Maybe you can be both. Can you be both? Nix asked. Can you be the person who lived and the person who was lost? Calloway considered this. I don't know, but I know you're not going to figure it out standing in a supply closet. Dr. Reeves is waiting in conference room. See, she'd like to talk with you, not as a patient, as someone who's been watching over you for 3 years and wants to help. Nix nodded slowly, set down the mop she hadn't realized she was still holding, followed Calloway through corridors that felt simultaneously familiar and foreign. Dr. Sarah Reeves was younger than Nix expected, early 40s, kind eyes behind practical glasses. She stood when Nix entered but didn't extend her hand, didn't impose any physical contact, just gestured to a comfortable chair. "How are you feeling?" she asked once they were settled. "Confused, angry, scared, like my entire life is a lie." The words tumbled out before Nix could stop them. "Also relieved, which makes me feel guilty. What kind of person feels relieved to find out they've been living a lie?" "The kind who found peace in that lie," Reeves said gently. "Nix, what you experienced wasn't deception. It was survival. Your mind did what it needed to do to protect you from something it couldn't process. There's no shame in that." "Then why do I feel ashamed?" Nix's voice cracked. 3 years I've been invisible, content with being invisible, and now I find out I was someone important, someone who mattered. How do I reconcile that?" Reeves leaned forward slightly. "Tell me something. In the last 3 years, have you been unhappy?" The question caught Nix off guard. "I've been content. My life was small, but it was mine. I didn't worry about much, didn't stress. Just cleaned and went home and watched television and slept. It was simple." "And simple is bad." "Simple is wasted," Nix said fiercely. "If I was really this decorated sniper, this important operative, then spending 3 years pushing a mop is what saved your life," Reeves interrupted firmly. "Nix, listen to me carefully. When we found you, you were catatonic, nonverbal, barely functioning. Whatever happened during Operation Artemis broke something fundamental inside you. The doctors said you'd never recover, that the best we could hope for was institutional care for the rest of your life." Nix stared. "I don't remember any of that." "Of course you don't, because slowly, day by day, you rebuilt yourself, not as Colonel Varley. You couldn't handle being her anymore, so you became someone new, someone safe, someone whose biggest stress was whether the floors were clean enough. And in that simplicity, you healed. You became functional again. That wasn't wasted time, that was recovery." Tears burned Nix's eyes. "But I'm not recovered. I still don't remember most of it." "You may never remember all of it," Reeves said gently. "Traumatic amnesia is unpredictable. Sometimes memories return fully. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they come back in pieces over years. The question isn't whether you'll remember everything. The question is whether you can move forward with what you know now." "I don't know how to do that." "Then let's figure it out together." Reeves pulled out a folder. "I want to show you something. These are your service records, not the classified missions, just the basics. Your training scores, commendations, performance reviews. I think it might help to see who you were, even if you don't remember being her." Nix took the folder with trembling hands, opened it. The first page was a photograph. A woman in military dress uniform, straight posture, serious expression, awards on her chest. It was her face. Younger, harder, but definitely her. "I don't recognize her," Nix whispered. "Not yet, but maybe you will. Or maybe you'll build a new relationship with who you are now based on understanding who you were then." Reeves paused. "Nix, you don't have to become Colonel Varley again, but you might want to let her inform who you become next. Nix spent the next hour reading her own life like a stranger's biography, distinguished marks in sniper training, multiple deployments, innovations in long-range shooting techniques, a mind that understood ballistics the way poets understood language, and then Operation Artemis. The details were redacted, but the outcome was clear. Mission compromised, operative lost, presumed dead. What happened? Nix asked finally. What went wrong? We don't know, Reeves admitted. You're the only one who could tell us, and you can't remember. But I need to know. Why? The question stopped Nix cold. Why did she need to know? What would it change? The past was gone, 3 years erased. Whether she remembered what happened or not, she'd still lost those years, still lost that life. Because, she said slowly, working through the thought as she spoke, if I don't know what broke me, how do I know it won't break me again? Reeves nodded like this was the answer she'd been waiting for. That's the fear talking, and it's valid, but Nix, you're not the same person who went into Operation Artemis. You're not even the same person who came out of it broken. You've spent 3 years becoming someone new, someone stronger. The trauma might return. The memories might surface, but you're different now. Am I? Nix looked down at her maintenance uniform. Because I still feel like the janitor who's pretending to be something she's not. Then maybe, Reeves said carefully, you need to find out what happens when the janitor stops pretending. That afternoon, Nix returned to Ghost Range, not in her uniform, in civilian clothes. She stood at the edge of the firing line, watching a new group of SEALs run through qualifications. They didn't know her story yet. To them, she was just someone watching. Calloway saw her, walked over, didn't say anything, just stood beside her in companionable silence. I keep thinking about yesterday, Nix said after a while. That moment when I held the rifle, it felt like coming home, but also like visiting a house where someone died. Does that make sense? Perfect sense, Calloway replied. Muscle memory is powerful, but it's not the whole story. You can remember how to do something without remembering why you learned it in the first place. Is that enough, to just know how without knowing why? Calloway watched a SEAL miss his third target, winced slightly. I've been training shooters for 3 decades. You want to know what I've learned? The why matters less than the how. You can have all the motivation in the world, all the reasons and justifications and noble causes. But if you can't make the shot when it counts, none of that matters. Conversely, you can make the shot perfectly even if you've forgotten every reason you learned how. The skill exists independently of the story. Nix absorbed this. So you're saying I don't need to remember my past to move forward. I'm saying your past already moved you forward, whether you remember it or not. The question is what you do with that now. They watched in silence for a while. Then Nix asked quietly, what if I want to try again, not as Colonel Varley, not trying to reclaim something I've lost, but as whoever I am now? Would that be possible? Calloway's weathered face broke into a genuine smile. Ma'am, I've been hoping you'd ask that question since yesterday. What does it mean to start over when you can't remember what you're starting from? Nix discovered the answer wasn't as complicated as the question. It meant showing up. It meant saying yes when you wanted to say no. It meant holding a rifle even when your hands shook with the memory of things you couldn't consciously recall. The first official training session was scheduled for the following Monday. Nix arrived 30 minutes early, not in a uniform. She didn't have one that fit anymore, just practical clothing suitable for the range. Her hair pulled back, no makeup, nothing to hide behind. Calloway was already there. He'd set up a single firing position, no observers, no pressure, just the desert, the targets, and time. Ground rules, he said. No expectations, no performance metrics, no comparing yourself to who you were or who you might have been. Today, we're just figuring out what you can do now. Fair. Nix nodded. Her throat was too tight to speak. Good, first things first. Basic safety protocols. I'm going to walk through them like you've never held a rifle before. No shortcuts, no assumptions. For the next hour, Calloway treated her like a complete beginner, and surprisingly it helped. Because in a very real way she was a beginner. The muscle memory existed, but the conscious knowledge, that had to be relearned. She handled the rifle, learned its weight again, felt how the stock settled against her shoulder. Calloway corrected her grip, adjusted her stance, walked her through breathing techniques she'd apparently mastered years ago but now had to consciously remember. "When you're ready," he finally said, "take a shot. No pressure, just see what happens." Nyx settled into position, found the target through her scope. Her breathing steadied automatically. Her finger found the trigger, and for just a moment there was perfect clarity. No past, no future, just the eternal present of shooter and target. She fired. The shot went wide, missed by at least 6 inches. Nyx lowered the rifle, expecting disappointment, but Calloway was smiling. "Perfect. Perfect, I missed. You took the shot, that's perfect. Yesterday you made 5 impossible hits because muscle memory took over. Today you're actually learning. Big difference. Again. Second shot, better, still off center but closer. Third shot, closer still. Fourth shot, nearly perfect. Fifth shot, dead center." Calloway nodded approval. "And that is how you build a shooter, not through miracles, through practice, through repetition, through actually understanding what you're doing instead of relying on reflexes you don't remember developing." They spent 3 hours on the range. By the end, Nyx's shots were consistently good, not miraculous, not record-breaking, just good, solid, the kind of shooting that came from actually thinking about technique instead of relying on buried instincts. And surprisingly, it felt better, more honest, like she was earning each hit instead of borrowing them from a past self she couldn't remember. As they packed up, Calloway said casually, "Admiral Hawthorne asked me to extend an offer, not official yet, but he'd like you to consider coming back in an advisory capacity, not as an operator, as an instructor, teaching what you know to the next generation of shooters." Nyx froze. "I don't know enough to teach." "You know more than you think, and what you don't remember, you're relearning. Sometimes the best teachers are the ones who understand what it's like to struggle with the basics. You could be that for these operators." "What about Westerland, the other SEALs? They saw me as a janitor. How do I command their respect now?" Calloway's expression hardened slightly. "Respect isn't given because of what you were. It's earned through what you do. You want their respect. Show up. Do the work. Be honest about your limitations. That'll earn more respect than any rank or title ever could." Nyx considered this. "Can I think about it?" "Take all the time you need. The offer stands." But the truth was, Nyx already knew her answer. She'd known it the moment she held that rifle and felt something inside her settle into place. She might not remember being Colonel Varley, might never fully recover those lost years, but she remembered the feeling of purpose. And after 3 years of contentment without purpose, she was hungry for it again. That evening she called Admiral Hawthorne. "I'll take the position, on one condition." "Name it," Hawthorne replied. "I won't pretend to be someone I'm not. The operators don't need to know all the classified details. But I won't claim expertise I can't remember having. I'll be honest about my limitations, about what I know and what I'm still relearning. They deserve that honesty." Hawthorne was silent for a long moment. Then, "Agreed. In fact, I think that honesty will make you a better instructor than you were before. Humility is a rare quality in the special operations community." "When do I start?" "Tomorrow, if you're ready." Nyx looked around her small apartment. The simple life she'd built, the comfortable anonymity. Part of her mourned what she was leaving behind. But a larger part, the part that had taken 5 perfect shots before her conscious mind caught up, was ready to move forward. "I'm ready," she said. The next morning, Nix arrived at Ghost Range wearing borrowed military fatigues. Still no rank insignia. Just a name tape that read VARLEY without the title she couldn't remember earning. A group of 12 SEALs waited. Among them was Westerland. His expression was carefully neutral, neither hostile nor welcoming, just watchful. Calloway made introductions. "Gentlemen, this is Nix Varley. She'll be assisting with training going forward. Some of you saw her shoot on Monday. What you didn't see was everything that came before and after. Ms. Varley has agreed to work with us despite some significant personal challenges. I expect you to treat her with the professionalism you'd show any instructor." The SEALs nodded. Nix could see the questions in their eyes, the curiosity, but also the willingness to reserve judgment, to see what she could actually do before deciding what she was worth. "I need to be clear about something," Nix said, her voice carrying across the range with unexpected authority. "I'm not here to pretend I'm something I'm not. Yes, I can shoot. You saw that. But I don't remember my training, don't remember my deployments, don't remember earning whatever qualifications I apparently have. So if you're expecting some legendary instructor who has all the answers, you're going to be disappointed." She paused. "Let that sink in. What I can offer is honesty about what I'm relearning, about what works and what doesn't, about the difference between natural talent and actual technique. I'll share everything I figure out as I figure it out. That's the deal. If that's not good enough, speak now." Silence. Then Westerland spoke up. "Ma'am, I owe you an apology. The way I treated you last week, that was unacceptable. I'd like to start over if possible." Nix met his eyes, saw genuine contrition there. "Apology accepted, Lieutenant. I wasn't exactly advertising my background. Let's both move forward." The tension that had been holding the group together released all at once. The operators visibly relaxed. Training could begin. And it was messy. Nix didn't have polished lectures prepared, didn't have a curriculum memorized. She worked from instinct and relearned knowledge, stopping frequently to think through what she was teaching, to make sure she understood the why behind the how. But something magical happened in that messiness. The operators engaged more deeply than they might have with a traditional instructor. When Nix admitted she didn't know something, they worked together to figure it out. When she demonstrated a technique but couldn't explain the theory behind it, they reverse-engineered the principles together. By midday, the range had transformed into something closer to a collaborative workshop than a traditional training session. Nix found herself learning as much as she taught, and the operators, instead of feeling cheated by an instructor who didn't have all the answers, seemed energized by the opportunity to actively participate in their own education. During a water break, Calloway pulled Nix aside. "You're a natural at this." "I'm making it up as I go." "Exactly. That's what makes it work. You're not lecturing, you're exploring together. That's how real learning happens." "But what about when they need actual expertise? When lives depend on getting it right?" Calloway gestured toward the operators. "Look at them. They're thinking, questioning, actually engaging their brains instead of just following orders. That's going to save more lives than any amount of rote memorization ever could." Nix watched her students, saw them analyzing each other's form, offering suggestions, building on each other's ideas. He was right. This was different from traditional instruction, messier, less polished, but maybe more effective because of it. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Nix called the group together for final notes. "Today was rough, unpolished, probably not what you expected, but I want you to take something away from this. Excellence isn't about never struggling, it's about what you do with the struggle, how you learn from it, how you adapt and grow and get better because of it, not despite it." She paused, remembering something Dr. Reeves had said. "I spent 3 years not knowing who I was, and honestly I'm still figuring it out. But what I learned in that time is that who you were matters less than who you're becoming. Skills can be relearned. Knowledge can be rebuilt. What matters is whether you show up and do the work. That's all any of us can do. Show up." do the work get better? The operators nodded, not with the enthusiastic agreement of people being told what they wanted to hear, but with the thoughtful acceptance of people hearing something that resonated as true. As they dispersed, Westerland approached. "Ma'am, I just wanted to say, today was the best training session I've had in years, not despite the rough edges. Because of them, thank you." Nix felt something warm bloom in her chest. Pride, relief. She couldn't quite name it, but it felt like progress. "Thank you, Lieutenant. That means more than you know." He nodded and left. Nix remained on the range as twilight settled over the desert. The temperature dropped, the shadows lengthened, and for the first time since Monday's revelation, she felt something close to peace. Not the comfortable peace of invisibility. This was different, harder earned. The peace of someone who'd chosen to step into the light despite not knowing what the light might reveal. Calloway joined her one final time. "How do you feel?" Nix considered the question carefully. "Uncertain, challenged, a little scared, but also alive, more alive than I've felt in 3 years." "That's the cost of choosing growth over comfort," Calloway observed. "But I think you're going to find it's worth paying." "I hope so," Nix said. Then more firmly, "I think so." They stood together in the fading light. The range empty except for the two of them and all the potential tomorrow might bring. "Can you teach what you're still learning yourself?" 6 months later, Nix knew the answer was yes, but not easily, and not without cost. The Ghost Range had become her second home. She arrived before dawn most days, staying until the desert stars came out, working with operators who challenged her, pushed her, forced her to stay ahead of them even when she didn't feel ahead of anything. Her memories hadn't returned, not fully. Sometimes fragments would surface, a flash of recognition, a suddenly familiar sensation, but the cohesive narrative of her past remained locked behind walls her mind refused to demolish. Dr. Reeves said this was normal, expected even. Your brain is protecting you. When you're ready to remember, you will. Until then, focus on building new memories instead of excavating old ones. So Nix did. She built new memories on the range, new relationships with operators who knew her as an instructor rather than a legend, new skills layered on top of muscle memories she couldn't consciously access. The training program evolved. What started as rough collaboration became something more structured. Nix developed curriculum, not from memory, from experimentation, from watching what worked and what didn't, from building techniques from first principles instead of relying on forgotten expertise. And the results spoke for themselves. Operators trained under her new methodology posted scores that rivaled the facility's historical best. More importantly, they understood the theory behind their practice, could adapt techniques to novel situations, thought like snipers rather than just shot like them. Admiral Hawthorne noticed. So did others in the special operations community. Requests came in for Nix to consult on training programs at other facilities, to review curriculum, to share her methods. Each request was both validation and reminder. Validation that what she was building mattered. Reminder that she was building it without remembering how she'd done it the first time. On a particularly brutal July afternoon, Nick stood on the range watching a SEAL struggle with a shot that should have been routine. Heat shimmer made the target dance. Wind gusted unpredictably, but the fundamentals were there. He just couldn't execute. "Stop," Nix called. The operator lowered his rifle, frustration evident. "Tell me what you're thinking." "I'm thinking this wind is impossible, ma'am." "It's not. What else?" "That I've made harder shots than this, that I shouldn't be struggling." "And that," Nix said, walking toward him, "is your actual problem. You're not shooting the target. You're shooting your expectations, your frustration, your self-judgment. All that mental noise is louder than the wind." The operator blinked. "How do I shut it off?" "You don't. You acknowledge it, thank it for trying to help. Then you focus on the only thing that actually matters, this breath, This shot, this moment, everything else is just story, and story can't help you make this shot. She demonstrated taking his position, feeling the same wind, seeing the same dancing target, acknowledging the same frustration that wanted to rise up and make excuses, then letting it all go, focusing down to just breath and trigger and the narrow slice of time between decision and action. The shot rang out, perfect hit. That's not about skill, Nick said, handing back the rifle. It's about presence, being completely here instead of partly here and partly in your head arguing with yourself. Try again. The operator settled back into position. Nix watched him consciously release tension she hadn't realized he was carrying, saw his breathing settle into a rhythm that came from center rather than anxiety. His shot was perfect. There it is, Nick said quietly. That's what I'm teaching. Not just marksmanship, mental discipline. The skill to be fully present even when conditions are terrible and stakes are high, and every part of you wants to panic or give up or make excuses. The operator nodded slowly. Where did you learn this? I mean, I know you don't remember your training, but this approach, it's different from anything I've been taught before. Nick smiled. I learned it by forgetting, by losing everything and having to rebuild from scratch. When you start with nothing, you can't rely on past success or reputation or anything except what's true right now. That's actually a gift, even though it didn't feel like one at the time. Word of this philosophy spread. Operators started requesting Nick specifically, not because she was the most decorated instructor, not because she had the longest resume, but because she taught them to work with their minds as well as their weapons. Calloway watched this evolution with obvious pride. You've created something special here, he told her one evening. Something that transcends traditional training. The operators aren't just better shooters, they're better thinkers. Is that enough? Nix asked. I still can't remember Operation Artemis. Can't tell them about real mission experience because I don't remember it. Doesn't that limit what I can offer? Your lack of remembered experience forces you to focus on principles instead of anecdotes, on theory instead of war stories. That makes your teaching more universal, more applicable to situations you've never encountered because you're not tied to situations you have encountered but can't remember. It was a kind interpretation. Nix appreciated it even as part of her mourned what she'd lost. One afternoon, Westerland approached her after training. His record, which had stood for months before Nix's miraculous performance, had since been broken by 3 different operators using techniques she'd taught. "Ma'am, can I ask you something?" he began. "Of course. Do you ever wish you could remember? Like, wouldn't it be easier to teach if you had full access to your past experience?" Nix considered this. Maybe. Or maybe I'd be stuck teaching the way I was taught instead of discovering new methods. Maybe forgetting was necessary to innovate. I don't know, probably never will, but I've made peace with that uncertainty. How do you make peace with such a huge unknown? By recognizing that we all operate with unknowns. You don't know if your next deployment will go according to plan. Don't know if your training will be sufficient for what you face in the field. Don't know how you'll react when things go wrong. All we can do is prepare as best we can, then trust ourselves to adapt when the unknown becomes real. Westerland absorbed this. That's actually really helpful, thank you, ma'am. After he left, Nix remained on the range. The sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of orange and purple that looked too beautiful to be real. She thought about her answer, about how she'd made peace with unknowing. It wasn't entirely true. She hadn't made peace. Not completely. There were still nights when she woke up gasping from dreams she couldn't remember, her heart pounding with fear that had no clear source. Moments when a sound or smell would trigger something just beneath the surface of consciousness, leaving her shaken without understanding why. Dr. Reeves said this was normal. Trauma didn't need memory to leave marks. The body remembered even when the mind forgot. All Nix could do was acknowledge the feelings without demanding explanations. But the days were getting easier, the nights less haunted, and the work gave her purpose beyond remembering, purpose in teaching others, in building something new rather than trying to rebuild something lost. As stars began appearing in the darkening sky, Admiral Hawthorne approached. Nix hadn't heard him arrive. She was getting better at staying present, but apparently still had work to do. "Penny for your thoughts," Hawthorne said. "Just thinking about purpose," Nix replied. "How I spent 3 years without it, then suddenly had it handed back to me in a form I didn't recognize. How purpose doesn't actually require memory, just commitment to something beyond yourself." Hawthorne nodded. "I've been reviewing your performance reports, the operator's scores, the feedback from other facilities using your methods. Nix, you've exceeded every expectation we had when we offered you this position." "But," she heard the hesitation in his voice, "but I want to offer you something more. A permanent position, not advisory, full faculty, official rank reinstatement if you want it, full access to all training resources. Essentially, we want to make you the lead architect of the entire Ghost Range program." Nix's breath caught. That's a significant responsibility." "It is, and you're the right person for it, not despite your memory loss, because of how you've adapted to it, because of the new approaches you've developed, because you've proven that excellence doesn't require remembering past excellence. It requires showing up and doing the work right now." "Can I think about it?" "Take your time, the offer stands." But even as Hawthorne left, Nix knew her answer. She'd spent 3 years hiding from responsibility, 3 years being small and safe and invisible. That time had been necessary. Healing required it, but she was healed enough now, strong enough to carry weight again. The next morning, she accepted the position. Word spread quickly through the facility. The janitor who'd become an instructor was now the architect of the program itself. Some operators celebrated. Others seemed uncertain about someone with amnesia holding such authority. Nix addressed the concerns directly in her first official briefing. "I know this is unusual. I know you might have doubts about someone who can't remember her own service leading this program. Those doubts are fair. All I can tell you is this. I will work harder than anyone to earn your trust. Will be more transparent about my limitations than any leader you've had before. And will build this program based on what works right now, not what worked in the past." She paused. Memory is valuable, experience matters, but they're not everything. What matters more is whether we can adapt, whether we can learn, whether we can build something excellent from whatever materials we have available. That's what I'm offering, not perfection from remembered glory, but growth through honest work. The room was silent. Then one operator stood, then another. Within moments, the entire briefing room was on its feet, applauding not with the polite courtesy of military protocol, but with genuine respect. Tears burned Nix's eyes. She blinked them back, nodded acknowledgement, waited for the room to settle before continuing with the briefing. Later, as she reviewed training schedules and curriculum updates, Calloway stopped by her new office, much larger than the supply closet she used to work from, windows overlooking the range, a nameplate that read Director Varley. "Feels different?" he asked. "Everything feels different," Nix admitted. 6 months ago I was mopping these floors. Now I'm running the program. It's surreal." "You've earned it." "Have I? I still can't remember earning it the first time." Calloway sat down across from her. "Nix, I'm going to tell you something I probably should have told you months ago. When Admiral Hawthorne first told me who you really were, I was skeptical. I thought putting someone with amnesia in an instructional role was a mistake, that you'd be a liability more than an asset. And now I think your amnesia might be the best thing that ever happened to this program. Because you had to rebuild from scratch, you questioned everything. Didn't take anything for granted. Built methods based on what actually works instead of what tradition says should work. You innovated because you couldn't remember the old ways. That's not a liability. That's exactly what this program needed. Nix felt something settle in her chest, not full peace, but closer to it than she'd been before. Thank you, that means more than you know. Just keep doing what you're doing, keep showing up, keep being honest, keep building something new. That's all any of us can ask. How do you build a legacy when you can't remember the first one? Nick stopped asking that question somewhere in the year that followed. Stopped measuring herself against a past she couldn't recall. Started focusing instead on the present she was actively creating. The Ghost Range transformed under her leadership, not because she remembered classified techniques from her previous service, but because she approached every problem fresh, questioned assumptions, built systems based on psychological research and practical testing rather than tradition. Operators from across all branches began requesting training slots. The waiting list stretched months. Other facilities sent representatives to observe and learn. Nix's methods were documented, taught, replicated. She developed a reputation, not as the legendary Colonel Varley who disappeared and returned, but as Director Varley, the instructor who'd built something new from broken pieces, who taught presence over perfection, mental discipline over mechanical skill, adaptation over memorization. Her personal quarters evolved too. What had been a sparse apartment furnished with cast-offs became a space that reflected both identities. Military commendations she didn't remember receiving hung beside photographs from the past 3 years. Books on neuroscience and trauma recovery shared shelf space with technical manuals on ballistics. She was learning to be both, not janitor or colonel, not past or present, but an integration of everything she'd been and everything she'd become. Dr. Reeves noticed during one of their increasingly rare sessions. "You seem settled," she observed, "more at peace with the unknowing." "I am," Nix confirmed. "I may never remember Operation Artemis, may never know exactly what happened, and I've accepted that. The person who went on that mission, she did what she needed to do, whether I remember it or not. I trust that, trust her, even though I can't recall being her." That's significant growth. It doesn't mean I don't wonder. Some nights I still wake up with fragments, images that might be memories or might be dreams. The line isn't always clear, but I don't chase them anymore, don't force them. I figure if my mind wants me to remember, I will. If not, I won't. Either way, I have work to do now. That work intensified as the months passed. Nix was invited to speak at conferences, to consult on national training standards, to share her philosophy beyond Ghost Range. Each invitation was an opportunity and a risk, because speaking publicly meant potentially running into people who knew Colonel Varley, who might expect her to be someone she no longer was, or never felt like she'd been at all. The first major conference was in Virginia, hundreds of special operations personnel. Nix's session was titled Training the Mind, Psychological Approaches to Precision Performance. She'd prepared thoroughly, but standing backstage listening to her introduction, panic fluttered in her chest. What if they asked about her missions, about specific operations, about details she couldn't provide? Then she remembered her own teaching, this breath, this moment. Everything else was just story. She walked onto the stage, faced the crowd, began speaking. "My name is Nix Varley. I'm the director of training at Camp Artemis, and I need to tell you something right up front. I don't remember most of my military career. Traumatic amnesia. 3 years ago I was declared KIA. I didn't die, but the person I was before, she's mostly gone. What I'm going to share with you today isn't wisdom from decades of remembered experience. It's methods I developed by starting from scratch, by having to rebuild everything I'd lost, by learning to teach what I was relearning myself." The room was silent, attentive, not judging, just listening. For the next hour, Nix shared everything. Her methods, her philosophy, the psychological principles she discovered, the techniques that worked, the approaches that failed. She was vulnerable, honest, didn't pretend to have answers she didn't have. And the audience responded, not with skepticism, with hunger. They asked questions, shared their own struggles, connected with the honesty in a way they might not have connected with polished certainty. After the session, a line formed, operators wanting to talk, to share their own stories of trauma and recovery, to thank her for being real instead of being perfect. An older officer approached near the end, silver hair, distinguished bearing. Something in his face looked familiar in a way Nix couldn't place. "Director Varley," he said, "I don't know if you remember me. We served together before Operation Artemis." Nix's heart rate spiked. I'm sorry." "Don't be, I'm just glad to see you alive. And more than that, to see you thriving. What you built at Ghost Range, what you shared today, it's exceptional. Colonel Varley was one of the finest operators I ever worked with, but Director Varley might be even more valuable to the community, not despite what you lost, because of what you built from it." Tears burned Nix's eyes. "Thank you, that means everything." They talked for a few more minutes. He shared stories about operations Nix couldn't remember, described her as she'd been before, not trying to make her remember, just filling in gaps, offering context without expectation. When he left, Nix felt something shift. She'd been afraid of people from her past, afraid they'd expect her to be someone she couldn't be. But this officer had accepted both versions, had seen value in what she'd become rather than mourning what she'd lost. Maybe others could too. The months continued to pass. Nix's reputation grew. She was offered promotion, declined. She didn't need rank, didn't need title beyond the one she'd earned in the present. Director was enough. Builder of systems, teacher of minds. That felt right in a way Colonel never had. On the anniversary of her first shot on Ghost Range, Calloway organized a small gathering. No formal ceremony, just the core team who'd supported her journey. Admiral Hawthorne, Dr. Reeves, a few senior instructors including Westerland. "1 year ago," Calloway said, raising a glass of water since they were on base, "a janitor took 5 shots that changed everything. Not just for her, for all of us, for this program, for everyone who's come through these doors since. Nix, you've built something remarkable, and you did it by being exactly who you are. Not who you were, not who you thought you should be, but who you chose to become. That's rare, that's valuable, that's worth celebrating." Glasses clinked. Nix felt warmth flood through her, not the burning heat of the desert, but the gentle warmth of belonging, of community, of purpose earned through honest work. Later, standing on the range as sunset painted the sky, Nix reflected on everything that had changed. A year ago she'd been terrified, lost, uncertain about everything. Today, she was still uncertain about plenty, still didn't remember most of her past, still woke up some nights with phantom anxiety. But she had direction, had work that mattered, had people who respected her for who she was becoming rather than who she'd been. That was enough, more than enough. A young operator approached, new to the program, struggling with confidence issues despite obvious talent. "Ma'am, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "How do you deal with not being sure? Like, you don't remember your training. How do you trust yourself to teach when you can't remember learning?" Nix smiled. It was a question she'd asked herself 1,000 times. "I trust the process, trust that if I show up consistently, if I do the work honestly, if I build from principles rather than memory, the results will speak for themselves, and so far they have. That doesn't mean I never doubt, but doubt isn't fatal, it's just information. I acknowledge it, thank it for trying to protect me. Then I do the work anyway." The operator nodded slowly. "That's helpful, thank you, ma'am." "Call me Nix," she said. "We're all just people trying to get better at something difficult. Titles don't change that." As the operator left, Nix remained on the range. The stars were coming out, desert darkness settling in. She thought about the janitor who'd stood here a year ago, invisible, content with small comfort, afraid of being seen. That woman had been necessary, had been exactly what Nyx needed to be to survive, but she wasn't enough anymore, wasn't sufficient for the person Nyx was becoming. Sometimes growth required leaving safety behind, required stepping into light despite not knowing what the light would reveal, required building new stories instead of excavating old ones. Nyx had learned that, was still learning it, would probably keep learning it for the rest of her life. But that was okay, actually better than okay, because growth, unlike memory, was something she could control, something she could choose every single day. The desert wind picked up, cool now that the sun was down. It whispered across the range, across the targets, across Nyx's face like a blessing or a promise or maybe just acknowledgement that she'd made it through. She had made it through, not back to who she was, that person was gone, but forward to who she could be. Someone new, someone built from fragments and determination and daily choice to show up and do the work and trust the process. That was enough, that was everything. As Nyx walked back toward the main building, her shadow stretched long behind her in the facility lights. One shadow, not two, not Janitor and Colonel fighting for dominance, just Nyx, whole in her brokenness, strong in her uncertainty, enough exactly as she was. And in the end, that was the only legacy that mattered. Not what she'd been before the desert, not what she'd lost in Operation Artemis, but what she built afterward, day by day, shot by shot, in the patient pursuit of excellence that required no audience and no recognition to have meaning. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. And Nyx Varley, whoever she had been and whoever she was becoming, had learned to act with dignity so quiet it needed no announcement, so certain it required no validation, so complete it transcended memory itself. The lights of Camp Artemis glowed against the dark desert sky. Inside, operators trained. Outside, the wind carried stories across sand that had seen countless warriors come and go. Nyx was just one more, unremarkable in the grand scheme, extraordinary in the particular. And that balance between insignificance and importance, between memory and presence, between who we were and who we choose to become, was where all true growth happened. Nyx had found her place in that balance, not perfectly, not permanently, but genuinely, and for now, for this moment, that was more than enough. It was everything.